So, Your Honor, I would just really ask you to please reconsider your opinion. In this case, I don't think a privacy interest could be greater. There have been death threats made against other witnesses. There have been death threats made. My understanding is there's been threats against counsel. Our office has received threats.
We firmly believe that the law supports the conclusion that that particular prosecutor should have been screened off.
And so this court is going to deny the request to close the hearing.
By now, everyone remembers that day in September. The chaos, the screams, the disbelief as a political event turned into a crime scene. We all watched the footage, we all heard the reports, and we all thought the story was finally settling into the slow grind of the justice system. But then came the twist no one expected. The man accused of shooting Charlie Kirk isn't just pleading his innocence, he's trying to rewrite the courtroom itself. He's demanding that the very prosecutors handling the case be removed, claiming bias, claiming misconduct, claiming that the people seeking justice for that night can't be trusted to do their jobs. Meanwhile, the victims, the people who were there, the ones who still flinch at loud noises, the ones who can't forget the smell of panic in the air, they're forced to watch the system bend and twist around the man accused of causing it all. And the question haunting everyone who lived through that night is simple and terrifying. If he can reshape the courtroom, what else can he reshape? The truth? The narrative? The outcome? This case isn't just back in the headlines, it's unraveling in real time, and what's happening behind those courtroom doors is more shocking than the night that started it all. Most people remember exactly where they were when they first heard the news. The message came through phones, televisions, whispers between coworkers, and the sudden silence that follows disbelief. A man had been shot, not just any man. A man whose voice had become impossible to ignore. A man who stood on stages and challenged people to argue, to disagree, to speak. And in the middle of a university campus, in broad daylight, that voice was taken away. What happened that day didn't just end a life. It fractured trust. It froze time for a family. And now, months later, it is tearing open a new wound inside a courtroom where justice itself is being questioned. This is not just the story of a shooting. This is the story of what happens after the cameras leave, after the crowd goes home, after grief turns into paperwork, motions, and power struggles. And if you're still watching right now, I want you to ask yourself something. How many times have we scrolled past stories like this, thinking justice would handle it, without ever looking back? Because what's happening now should make every single person uncomfortable. Before we go further, do me a favor, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video, not for the algorithm, for accountability, for memory. Because stories like this disappear when we stop paying attention. On the day it happened, the atmosphere was loud but normal. Students walking between buildings, people gathering for an event that promised words, not violence. Security was present, the crowd was dense, phones were out, voices rose and fell like they always do at events like this. And then a sound cut through everything. A sound that doesn't belong in a place meant for learning. A sound that people didn't want to recognize at first. A sound that made some freeze, some scream, some run. Within seconds, everything changed. Charlie Kirk collapsed in front of hundreds of witnesses. Blood on concrete, panic in the air. People shouting for help that couldn't come fast enough. And in those first moments, no one knew what had happened, only that something irreversible had just occurred. Paramedics arrived, police sealed off the area, and the campus, a place meant for ideas, became a crime scene. But here's the part that should haunt you. While chaos was unfolding below, someone had already decided to disappear. The suspected shooter was gone, and for hours, no one knew where he was, what he was thinking, or whether he planned to do it again. Parents locked their doors, students huddled inside dorms. A community held its breath while investigators followed a trail that would eventually lead to one name, a young man barely into adulthood. When he was finally arrested, there was no dramatic chase, no movie moment, just the quiet click of handcuffs and the heavy realization that this wasn't a rumor anymore. This was real. This was permanent. He was charged with aggravated murder, one of the most serious charges possible, and almost immediately, prosecutors made it clear they would seek the harshest punishment allowed under the law. For many, that was the end of the story: a shooting, an arrest, a trial to come. But that's where most people stopped watching, and that's exactly when the most disturbing part began. Because while the public moved on, the case began to rot from the inside, not with violence, but with paperwork, legal strategies, and quiet meetings behind closed doors, the kind of slow, invisible process that decides whether justice is real or just a word we like to say. Months passed. Grief turned into waiting, waiting turned into frustration, and then, suddenly, a motion was filed that shook the entire case. The defense for the accused made a bold request. They wanted the entire prosecutor's office removed from the case. Not one attorney, not a single official, the entire office. Their argument, a conflict of interest. The claim centered on something most people wouldn't notice at first: a family connection. One of the prosecutors, they argued, had a personal tie to the event. A relative had been present at the rally, a text message had been sent in the immediate aftermath, and that, the defense claimed, was enough to compromise every decision made by the prosecution. Think about that for a moment. A case involving a public killing, a family demanding justice, a community still shaken, and now a legal battle over whether the people tasked with prosecuting the case are even allowed to do their jobs. The prosecution pushed back hard. They called it a delay tactic, a move designed to slow things down, to stretch out the process, to exhaust the system. They argued that no bias existed, that the connection was distant, that nothing improper had occurred. But the damage was already done. Because once you introduce doubt into a case like this, it spreads. Every decision is questioned, every filing is suspicious, every delay feels intentional. And then the most heartbreaking voice entered the conversation, the voice that should have mattered from the beginning. Charlie Kirk's widow stood up and asked for the trial to move forward, not for vengeance, not for spectacle, but for closure. She reminded the court that justice delayed is grief extended, that families don't heal while legal teams argue over procedure, that every day without answers is another day of loss. And still, the hearings continued, the motions piled up, the arguments grew longer, and the case, instead of moving toward resolution, sank deeper into technical battles that the public barely understands. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When a case becomes political, everyone forgets the human cost. A life ended, a family shattered, a community scarred, and now a system so tangled in itself that even justice feels uncertain. And if you think this doesn't affect you, you're wrong. Because every time a case like this drags on, it teaches us something dangerous, that accountability is optional, that attention fades, that if you wait long enough, people stop caring. That's why you're still here listening to this, because you know, deep down, that silence is part of the problem. The courtroom is quiet now. The crowd is gone. The campus has moved on. But the echoes of that moment are still there in every delay, every filing, every argument over who has the right to seek justice. And the question still hangs in the air, unanswered. Will this case end with accountability, or will it fade into the endless backlog of forgotten tragedies? If you don't want that to happen, share this video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with this story until the very end, because justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people refuse to look away. And right now, looking away is exactly what some people are counting on.